Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of Financial Tides. So, I'm sure everyone is interested in this topic because it's the big, beautiful bill that we're talking about. And just to kind of preface everything here, first off, I'm your host, Taylor Perillo, Certified Financial Planner, joined by my co-host, John Perillo, Certified Financial Planner. And we're going to be covering this bill in a way that isn't really about whether we like it or not, or the partisan sides of it, or what kind of situations you feel about certain politics of it. We're just going to talk about what it means for you, what kind of stuff was passed, what hasn't changed, and kind of how it may affect your situation going forward. So, the House did approve President Trump's big, beautiful bill in a vote that was 218 to 214. The Senate narrowly approved it first with the tie-breaking vote cast by Vice President Vance. So this is a bill that is extending Tax Cuts Job Act from 2017. It's including some other legislation of other tax cuts that are going to be made permanent, and it's increasing spending for border security, defense, energy production. So we're going to highlight some of the issues that are in the bill and kind of what they do and how they're going to affect you.
Thanks, Taylor. And hello, everybody. So I'm going to go over quickly no tax on tips and no tax on overtime. But before I do, I want to say something. I keep hearing out there that this bill now makes the tax cuts permanent. It doesn't make them permanent. It makes them permanent until the next president or administration changes them again. So they're only permanent in the sense that they had a sunset provision and they were going to go away on their own if nothing was done. That sunset provision is now gone, so they'll actually need another piece of legislation to change it. So it's permanent until the next legislation. And then the other thing is it's retroactive till the beginning of 2025. A lot of times we see a tax bill passed right before the recess and it takes effect the following January. The way the Tax Cuts Job Act of 2017 passed in 16, took place in 17. It started. So this one actually goes back to the beginning of this year. So let's dive right in with no tax on tips. Hmm. And no tax on overtime. Both of them, are they going to require employers to fix their W-2s? So if I've been working already for the last 6 months, 8 months, and getting overtime, that's got to be sliced and diced up now and fixed so that I can have no tax on that. So here's how it's going. It gives the legislation gives a federal tax break, and by the way, remember this is always just federal, to an above the line deduction of the first 25,000 in tips. That's a big number. Could be thousands in savings, and it is limited, however, to phase out ranges for people earning over 150,000 or couples over 300,000. And those same numbers apply. I know we don't like reading numbers, it gets monotonous, but 150 for an individual or 300 for a couple for the no tax on overtime, and that'll allow 12,500 for a single or 25,000 for a couple on overtime. And we're still unpacking this because I can't get a straight answer yet on whether if the wife makes 25,000 in overtime, is the whole thing there? It was unclear. Or is it 12,500 for each spouse? It looks to be 25,000 total for the couple if they're under 300,000. So
Yeah,
those
and
are the two
that's
big.
because it's not a W-2 item. So to answer John's rhetorical question or hypothetical question on the front end, it's a deduction on your actual tax return that you're getting. So it's the total overtime from the household. You get up to a $25,000 deduction if you're married for tax and overtime. So all those numbers were the deduction that you're taking off on your actual tax return. And this is not part of the empty back-ended permanent quote unquote piece of the legislation. So this is just through 2028 that this is occurring. So if this is going to be extended, they will need separate legislation to extend something like this. Another piece that we're going to dive into is car loan interest deduction. So right now, the interest that you can deduct is on your mortgage. This is another 2028 expiration date item on here that you're going to be able to deduct up to $10,000 annually of interest on loans for new U.S. assembled personal vehicles. So That's the big thing is US assembled vehicles. So, for example, my wife just got a new Volkswagen. It was obviously a German car. Volkswagen's headquartered in Germany, but it's assembled in Chattanooga, Tennessee. So this isn't just, hey, I have to go buy a Chevy, I have to go buy a Ford. No, you can buy foreign cars as long as they're assembled in the US, and that's between now and 2028. And this deduction is going to be available for any single filers up to $100,000 or joint filers up to 200,000. So the higher income and upper class are not going to be allowed to use this deduction. And it's only for vehicles that are assembled in the United States. So if the car is assembled elsewhere and then shipped on a boat through Long Beach or one of the New York ports, they will not qualify. They have to be assembled here regardless of manufacturer. So,
And Taylor,
um,
with the 10,000 interest restriction, most people's car payments, $700 a month part interest, they're not even hitting 8,000 in payments.
yeah,
So they're not going to hit that 10, but it's there.
it's there. Yeah. So some of the interest, if you end up on a higher interest loan for whatever reason, or really the people with poor credit are going to get the biggest benefit from this that have kind of the almost predatory interest rates on these loans. So. The next one is senior citizen tax boost. So, a lot of people, and this was kind of the workaround of the no tax on Social Security, because everyone was saying, hey, we were promised no tax on Social Security. What's that all about? Where do we get it? They didn't actually affect Social Security because Social Security, as we all know, and we've talked about in a different podcast, is struggling to stay solvent in its own right. So what they did instead is they introduced a temporary $6,000 federal tax deduction for Social Security recipients, aiming to reduce the taxes that they would pay on what their normal Social Security is. So they're trying to say that it will exempt about the 88% of the recipients of the federal tax on Social Security. 64% are already under those exemption rules because they only have Social Security income. So it jumps from 64 to 88% that really aren't paying tax on Social Securities with this deduction. But it would not really affect any of it would still affect the middle class portion, which is anybody with income of 75,000 up to 150,000 for joint filers, but it phases out entirely for anyone that's making above 175,000. So anyone that has large amounts of income and is considered that upper class will not get the benefit of this additional 6,000 per person federal deduction. So and again, this is only the federal deduction. There are a few states that still tax Social Security, not many left, but this is just a federal deduction for that.
Great. And there's something in it for the kids this time around. So the child tax credit has been increased from 2,000 to 2,200 per child starting next year. So even though I said everything was retroactive, everything's not retroactive. But children have to be under 17. They live with that parent deducting, getting the credit for at least 6 months and a day. They have to have a social security number, and it's for a parent with 200,000 of income or a couple with 400,000 of income. So pretty generous income limits, but it's a $2,200 credit, almost like another itemized deduction for or personal exemption for kids. And then the Trump accounts. This is one that immediately popped up. My daughter and son-in-law said, how does your granddaughter get the $1,000 Trump account? Yes, she does. It does not look like there's going to be any income limits on this. We're going to take it, and any other grandkids we have until January 2029. We're going to try to get everybody's going to get one of these $1,000 accounts. They're going to be invested in ETFs or mutual funds with an expense ratio of less than zero point 0.1. So I imagine there's going to be some government approval or list or however that's going to work. Um, but and you can also add up to 5,000 a year to these. They're not able to be touched in any way until the child is 18. So initially, I heard this and said, "Oh, it's the government trying to get people to have more kids to fix the Social Security system." Anybody that's had a kid knows it's a lot more than $1,000 to raise a child. So, and the fact that you can't touch it until they're 18 means that they're probably not going to go out and have kids to get the $1,000. I mean, it's a good thing that they're getting it, but it's going to get tucked away. Employers can add 2,500 to this account. Now I tell us that we don't give opinions, we give facts. I'm going to give you an opinion. I think the 529, the Roth, and equity-based life insurance are all better approaches in this for reasons I don't want to get into. I can do a whole podcast on that, but they're not bad choices. What I love about it is that it's going to force those families 18 years to have to look at an account and make decisions, not decisions, but make an understanding of the investments and how money grows and works. And so maybe the next generation will be better stewards of money. And I have one more thought on this that I think is important. Um, it's so the funds must be invested in ETFs, as I mentioned. A lot of times, what happens is these laws lead reality, right? So XYZ mutual fund company and XYZ broker dealer, all of them have to create these forms yet if they're going to participate in the $5,000 deposits. They have to set up accounts, create account forms, just like you need a separate form for every type of registration, joint, single, Roth, IRA, 401k. You'll need one that's called Trump account. And so I would be shocked if we have access to those $5,000 accounts before middle of next year to add to them. That said, we think there's better solutions outside of getting your free $1,000, which I think we should all jump on, and I can't wait to get it filled out for Marlo.
And then next is some of the Medicaid restrictions that are going to be added in. So I think this one's been misconstrued because Medicaid cuts are real. They are cutting Medicaid, but it's what they're actually cutting in the Medicaid. So the Medicaid is, just for those who don't know, a government-sponsored health program for the low income and disabled Americans. So this new legislation has added restrictions on the healthcare. So there's a couple different things that they added. The first being a working requirement for those who are able-bodied adults. So this does not include any disabled Americans. All disabled Americans will have um, the exemption from this and not have any working requirement. But they've also included work can count as volunteer work. So it's going to be about 80 hours a month. So about 20 hours a week if it's 4 weeks in a month. So a little less, about half time, really, that you have to be working or volunteering in some way, shape, or form to continue your eligibility. And that's something that is not taking Medicaid away. It's just making sure people are doing something productive if they're able to. And the Congressional Budget Office does estimate that it will result in 11.8 million Americans losing coverage under Medicaid over the next decade, which is really, again, those able-bodied people right now that are able to work but just currently aren't and are now going to have to either work or volunteer to continue to get those benefits. The next is Homeland Security and Immigration. So I know we're going across a bunch of different topics here. That's why they called it the One Big Beautiful Bill, is they lumped everything into one singular bill. But Homeland Security and Immigration, they're adding about over $46.5 billion for the border wall construction and related expenses, 45 billion for expanding the immigrant detention custody facilities. So example of those, I'm sure you guys have all been hearing about Alligator Alcatraz these days. And an additional 30 billion in funding for hiring, training, and other resources for the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So this is the spending portion of the bill. This is not something that's creating any revenue. It'll create um, some jobs for the U.S. economy in the sense that they're going to be hiring more, training more, building more. But it is strictly on the spending side, nothing that's going into your exact tax equation.
Great. And I think I wanted to say this at the beginning, and but I had made the note on my the third index card, and we hear about cuts, and it's a weaponized word between the parties because ever since I was young, I always heard there's going to be a a drastic cut in Medicare or Medicaid or schools or whatever. And then I would read the bill and find out that they're going to cut the increase from 8% a year to 6% a year. So they're going to increase it every year by 6% for the next 10 years, but they're going to cut it. They originally had an 8% annual increase in there. But when you read it, the people who don't want that cut say 25% draconian cuts. So it's just in how it's being spun, right? And most of the things in this bill have an increase every year for the next 10 years, except for the fact that they're called cuts by the people who don't want any of it to ever go down. So think about that when you think about language and how it's being spun to us. The SALT is one that I struggle with, the SALT, the state and local tax deduction. I benefit tremendously from this. Everyone in California that has a decent income benefits from this, or home ownership. Taylor benefits from this. Um, Everybody in New Jersey, you guys benefit. New York, Illinois. But at the same time, it means that the waitress in Arkansas is subsidizing my federal taxes. That's again, just pure math. The pure math is it's going from $10,000 to $40,000. So that means the last few years since the Tax Cuts Job Act, I could take my property taxes and my California income taxes, and even if they were $30,000 combined, I deducted 10 on my federal return. Now I'll deduct that full 30. And it's indexed for inflation every year. This is a piece that does sunset though. I didn't put it in my notes, but I think it sunsets in 2030. But we'll have meaningful tax reform twice by then, I'm sure. And then jumping on from SALT, the food stamp
Just
restriction.
just real quick,
Yeah.
John. It's after 2028, just like the rest of the stuff
Okay.
that it will sunset. And there is a cap on this as well. So income earners above 500,000 will be completely phased out as well. So it's not like everybody that is extremely wealthy and high income earners are going to get this increase. It gets phased back down to the original 10,000 as the minimum if you start earning above 500,000. So
Yep. Good. Food stamp restrictions. The bill continues to shift some of the responsibility, for the supplemental nutrition programs from the federal government to the individual states. While it's currently fully funded at the federal level, that's going to change starting in 2028. Under the new law, states will have an error rate below 6% will continue receiving full federal funding. And then states above that will be required to cover between 5 and 15%. I know we're throwing a lot of numbers out of there. I'm not sure anybody on this podcast or listening or getting it forwarded to them is even interested in this topic. But again, it's shifting from those who have and are not really needing it to those who need it, or and forcing the states to look harder at their budgets and say, all right, we gotta police this a little bit better and not just give it away.
yeah, and I think that's the big takeaway of this is it's that error rate. So they're trying to make sure that the proper people are receiving the food benefits, and if they're not, then they're not going to receive the funding at the state level to implement those programs. So it also just adds some of the same stuff we saw with Medicaid. So these entitlement programs that they're giving out to the low income is really just centered around making sure people that are able-bodied are working. So they add that to the food stamp requirement as well. So anyone from ages 18 to 54 that are on the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, or food stamps are now required to work and meet work requirements. And the age range is now increased for qualifying for these all the way from 18 to 64. So you have to be working up until age 54, and then you have to work, you'll still be eligible for the following 10 years, all the way to age 64. So Alaska and Hawaii are the other ones that may be granted waivers from the work requirements if they're making a good faith effort to comply with the laws. So Alaska and Hawaii have a little bit of a caveat in there that they might not have to follow the rules the main 48 states of the United States participate in. So, Next is clean energy. So Trump's new legislation removes a lot of the incentives that were set in place 3 years ago with the Inflation Reduction Act, and the Biden era tax credits for electric vehicles are going to be terminated. Clean electric production tax credits are going to be slowly rolled back. But the solar and wind will see their credits removed sooner. So the bill is requiring clean power projects to start using fewer Chinese components in their projects. But the main takeaway here is that some of those tax credits that you were receiving for energy efficient homes and solar and electric cars are going to go away. So don't count on those types of credits. And it might be too late already now if you did it this year to still get that credit. It's to be decided.
And it's interesting because, what you learn, I guess, in basic micro 101 and 201, if you're economics studies, is that they're just ways of shifting things around. Like a few years ago, they eliminated the electric vehicle credit at certain income levels, and it was an income level where most of the people buy electric vehicles. And, so at that income level, they took away the $7,500, and within 2 months, Tesla lowered all their cars by $7,500. So in a way, I wonder if that credit was really to help the consumer buy the Tesla, or if it was a handout to the company, that they get the extra $7,500 and they jacked it onto the car price. The same study has been done about student loans that as you take away more and more student loans availability, tuitions will be a little more stagnant because when student loans came out, tuition spiked immediately by student loan amounts. So it's just a microeconomic study, and I have, read these for years, and I find it fascinating that people think, oh, now we can't get the electric car anymore. Yeah, you can. If you're under the income level where you probably can't afford that electric car, you'll get the credit. So sorry for that.
No worries. And then really the final items is just what doesn't change. So this is what John was referring to earlier, the Tax Cuts Job Act provisions that were made quote unquote permanent, basically meaning that another legislative bill would have to be passed to change or eliminate any of these things. And that's the lowered individual tax rates. So that brings the tax rates to that 10, 12, 22, 24% brackets as opposed to the higher ones that we saw pre Tax Cuts Job Act. Those are now permanent in place, not going to sunset in 2025 like previously. The double standard deduction. So this is something that came in with the Tax Cuts Job Act. They did adjust it to be a little bit larger. So I think it's 15,000 for single, 30,000 for joint follower or filers for 2025. So that has now been adjusted and made permanent that you will always get that larger standard deduction amount. The increased estate and tax exemptions. So they're already quite large, but they're 15 million for per person for lifetime gift exemption. So there's plenty of room in most estates to pass on inheritance tax free. Fully expensing of 100% of qualified capital investments. So businesses, we're talking about equipment, software, any new equipment that is being brought into the workplace, or in real estate property, capital improvements and investments in those, like a new fridge or a new washer and dryer. And then lastly, just the pass-through business owners of LLCs and S corps can permanently deduct up to 20% of their qualified income. So those are all things that we've been doing and been able to do that are not changing, but just are no longer going to be sunsetted in 2025, which is what the Tax Cuts Job Act originally had it. They're now in place until legislation is passed to remove those.
Great. And in closing, I'd like to say thank you for attending and that your specific questions with regard to this bill are most important to us, right? If you don't care about the $15 million lifetime exemption, I don't blame you. It's a big leap to get there. If you don't have a child under 17 living at home, that doesn't apply to you, but there's something in here that applies to you or that we'll go over during our next strategy meeting. Thank you,
Awesome.
everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks for tuning in to Financial Tides. We'll see you next time.